What's up, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Scouting Combine. This show is brought to you by ThompsonCigar.com. Use promo code 3yards20 for 20% off your order of $75 or more. Once again, use promo code 3yards20 off your order for $75 or more for premium cigar. All right, folks. We got Coach here. We got Eric here. Gentlemen, how we doing tonight?
Doing well. Excited to talk about some linebackers. Obviously, in the time away, there has been quite a bit of news pertaining to the Dolphins. So excited to get into that. And one of the, I think, underrated needs for the Dolphins next season being talked about today here.
Yeah, as you guys can see, I'm not in my normal habitat here, but, wouldn't pass up an opportunity to talk some football with you guys.
Of course. There was a little bit of news released from last show to this show. I don't think it came to a surprise of any of us that Raheem Mostert was released. We talked a little bit about, his injuries, the fumble issues, the salary as well, and then maybe even the production. Jalen Wright had more yards on less touches than Raheem Mostert. And Raheem Mostert, he didn't look the same as 2023 self. And it's better to move off of a player 1 year early than a year too late, which we've gotten accustomed to the Dolphins doing. But it was a fresh change. Not only that, Kendall Fuller was a bit of a surprise, in my opinion. 31 years old, played a little more than half of the season, making a decent chunk of change. And then Durham Smythe, we kind of know he did not perform up to standard in the tight end position. But this frees up some money for the Dolphins as the NFL salary cap increased by $20+ million. And now the Dolphins are just under the cap. I wonder if the Dolphins had known that this was coming, therefore that's why they release the players to get just under the salary cap.
Yeah, I think so. CK from the 3 yards per carry crew, pointed out how close the Dolphins are to the salary cap while still being cap compliant. So I don't think that you make these moves without having that knowledge ahead of time. Like you said, the Mostert and the Smythe ones are not a huge surprise. The Fuller one, is a little more of a surprise because it does open up another starting position that needs to be filled, whether that's through free agency or through the draft. But it just is too much of a coincidence that, those three moves made all at the same time, just a couple days before, this is released to the public. And the Dolphins just happen to be cap compliant with part of those moves. Certainly makes it seem like they knew this before we did. You're on mute, Eric.
I forgot. Yeah,
there we go.
Not being muted. It certainly does seem that way when you consider the fact that, on paper, the cuts that they did make at the time kind of felt like they were barely making a dent into what the Dolphins needed to do over the course of this offseason. And it really is a boon to Miami, considering this was an offseason where they were thought to be, kind of in cap hell. But the thing that really intrigues me out of all three cuts is, as Hussam mentioned, the Kendall Fuller cut, because I think that it kind of gives you insight as to what else may happen in the secondary this offseason, particularly in the safety room. I know that there's been talk about Jalen Ramsey and when that transition is going to happen, not necessarily if it's an if. But if you're cutting your number 2 corner, I can't foresee the Dolphins wanting to replace 2 corners in the same offseason. So I feel like this kind of says to us that Jalen Ramsey is going to remain that CB1 for Miami in 2025. But I could be wrong there.
Yeah. Definitely. But this show, we're going to be talking about the linebackers. Obviously, we talked about the offense and the defensive line and the edge room. But I think this linebacker uh, group in Miami is a little bit understated just because of how solid the play for Jordyn Brooks was. He had a fantastic season last year. He had rotating partners in Anthony Walker Jr., who's slated to be a free agent, Tyrell Dodson, who we'll talk about a little bit later on in the show, and David Long Jr., who was a former captain last year, had a great season, fell off, was in the doghouse, and cut. Um, Now the Dolphins need another linebacker, either potentially in free agency or through the draft. And we'll talk about a little bit of the guys later today, but we have to touch up on Tyrell Dodson, who was the AFC Defensive Player of the Week up against the Cleveland Browns. He signed a 1-year, $4 million deal with the Seattle Seahawks, was cut. Dolphins picked him up, and he became a late season star for this defense.
No, he certainly did. And with Tyrell Dodson, it was really a situation where when the Dolphins claimed him, I think we all kind of looked around and were kind of confused by the entire thing. Because, everybody knew, even going back to his time in Buffalo, that this was a player that could be very productive, and a player that was someone who could be a crucial part of just about any defense here. And just getting into some of the things that Tyrell Dodson is able to do, I know that his big, not necessarily calling card, is that he is a coverage specialist, although going back to his days in Buffalo, he was fantastic in coverage. He's also, I think, very underrated against the run. And, you see a play like this here against the Packers, and granted, it's not a great game to go back and watch for the Dolphins. But you see something like this with a Tyrell Dodson, and for a guy that's a little slighter as a linebacker to get in there and kind of really meet a guy like Josh Jacobs at the point of contact and make the play, it just points to really good play strength for his size, and a guy that has that kind of range as a linebacker, something that you don't always see every day.
Yeah, he's definitely a really good athlete. I don't necessarily like him in space a ton, but I do feel like he is athletic enough to, cover in man coverage if the pass rush is going to get home quickly. As things extend a little bit, I don't think that he, finds the receivers as well. Alf talks about defenses having a scrape and a fill linebacker. And a player like Dodson, despite, like Eric said, being, 6 foot 237, he is more of that aggressive fill linebacker, going to come up and, fill the hole. He also is the type of guy that has a lot of special teams value. Even if he's not starting, even if he's not, out there every snap for your defense, he's still going to bring you value on your team. I think that he is better suited to be a third linebacker on a team than a starter. You can certainly do worse than him as a starter, but I think that when you're talking about rounding out an entire linebacker room, I feel like a Tyrell Dodson is the perfect guy to have as your third linebacker that can fill in for a couple of games at a time and is going to be a core special teams player.
I think with his specialty, especially in this type of defense, I kind of found it a bit surprising he got cut from the Seattle Seahawks. I do know that there were some schematic issues and some performance issues with that Seattle defense early on, which may have led to it. But in Miami, he was really, really good. And I do know that he would like to come back to Miami, but it's more so about the money. Just taking a look at his market value, we're looking at maybe $5 to maybe $5.5 million a year. Maybe he could come back on potentially another 1-year deal. We talk about the Dolphins maybe try to make another run in 2026 before all that money starts piling up on the offense and defensive side of the ball. Or they could look to continue to keep him on, maybe like an actual 3-year deal with maybe a void with 2 voided years, like a 3 years, $15 million deal, which isn't that expensive, especially for a guy that worked well in tandem and someone that can have that continuity with Jordyn Brooks. And, you have your second linebacker there, or maybe he can be your third. Maybe you could get another guy through the draft, which we'll talk about in later shows. But I do think that 1-2 punch of the linebacker of Brooks and Dodson had really good impact for the Dolphins in the short and intermediate aspects in coverage and along with the run fits in the defense.
Yeah, I think it just makes a lot of sense. Personally, I think I'm more along the lines of with Coach Eric, in that I think that his best role would be primarily as a third linebacker. If we're on a team with a really stout linebacker core, obviously, given the Dolphins' cap situation, we don't really know if they're going to be able to address all of their issues this season. So I think you can make the case that Tyrell Dodson is an acceptable second linebacker next to Jordyn Brooks. He certainly did play well and acclimate himself well to this defense down the stretch. But I think I would feel more comfortable if he is the third guy, because then you can really point to that being a position of strength on the defense.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I don't think we're going to talk about Anthony Walker too much on tonight's show, but if you look at those three players, the Brooks, the Dodson, and Anthony Walker, right? If you were to bring those three guys back, you'd be okay at the linebacker position to run it back, in my opinion. But I do think there's going to be some guys that we're going to talk about tonight that, if you were to add one of these guys in addition to that, can really make this a position of strength versus just a position that, is good enough to get by for 2025.
Yeah, and it's interesting because one of those guys that I think you can talk about that could be an addition, and granted, it would be another Chris Greer special, where we'd be looking at a guy that is, unfortunately, I think we can say now, oft injured, especially in recent years, and that would be San Francisco linebacker Dre Greenlaw. Greenlaw is somebody that's had really good success in the past. For example, with the 49ers, this is going back to the 2023 season against the Cincinnati Bengals. Back-to-back seasons with over 120 tackles before he got hurt. Dre Greenlaw really is a guy that if there were no red flags with health, I think he would probably be one of the more ideal players to add to this defense, just given the range that he does have and the versatility that he has, being able to even rush the passer at a pretty good level. But just given the injuries, I'm not sure that it's something that makes a lot of sense for this team right now, especially on the defensive side of the football.
We do talk about the injury history a lot. And you did say if it wasn't for the injury history for Dre Greenlaw, I think he would be out of market, out of price for us. But you got to remember, after Greenlaw got hurt in that Super Bowl against Kansas City, that 49ers defense was not the same. He was the heart and soul, and he was the beat of that defense. And you pair him up with a guy like Jordyn Brooks, that's two bona fide star-studded linebackers that can make sure the front end coverage is solid. He's athletic, he's speedy, he's versatile, he can rush the passer. He's good in run fits as well. And honestly, that might also be the hardest decision for the San Francisco 49ers. It's nothing to do with the desire. It's about the injury history as well. He played one half of football in 3 snaps in 2024. It's not that encouraging of a sign where he is at physically. So there's concerns and risks if the 49ers were to commit to him, and if the Dolphins are to give him, a decent enough contract as well. He's definitely a difference maker. The impact he had was evident, especially in that Super Bowl run, and it was evident when he went out. It's really dependent on the body. Like the linebackers are asked to do a lot, especially in Anthony Weaver's scheme. His market value right now is around maybe $6 to $7 million if it was a 1-year contract. But if it was a multiple-year contract, you're looking around a $5.5 to $6 million APY. And I don't know if the Dolphins would be willing to do that given the injury history. I mean, they just let Raheem Mostert go. They have questions surrounding Tua and his injury history as well. Like if the Dolphins really want to get over the hump, they need good players that are on the field. And I just don't know if they're willing to take that risk with that amount of money. And if I was Chris Grier, I would want to learn from my past mistakes because I know I'm on the hot seat this upcoming season. So I personally would not go after Dre Greenlaw. He's a great player, but just the injury concerns in history, it might be too much of a risk, especially in the linebacker group.
Yeah, I mean the medicals are obviously going to be huge for Greenlaw. If healthy is obviously a phrase that we use a lot when talking about Chris Grier and the Dolphins, and that definitely applies to Dre Greenlaw. I'm not overly concerned with the injury history in the sense that, that original Achilles tear was in the Super Bowl of the 2023 season. So you can't get any later in the season than that. And we saw with both Jalen Phillips and Bradley Chubb how difficult it is to return the next season, after a late season injury. So even if he had been able to return, I don't know that I would have expected him to return to his same level of play that he was performing at before. So I'd be really interested to see, considering that he didn't play a lot in 2024, how much his body has continued to be able to recover from the injury with the Super Bowl. But obviously, like I said, the medicals are going to be huge for him. You would think that by the time free agency rolls around that he's able to be a full go with workouts and really be able to display where he is medically for teams. If he comes out and he still is struggling from those injuries, then that would be, almost an immediate, cross off the list for me. But, if he can come out and he can show that he's recovered, he can run full speed now, he can change directions, and he can get off the ball the way that he used to, then, if the money's right, it's definitely a player I would still look at.
Yeah, I think that it's a player you definitely still look at in terms of you look at a guy that, maybe there's a little bit of risk tolerance built in there, whereas, does the contract become so cheap that, it's almost something you can't pass up on. But coming off of multiple lower body injuries, I really just wonder about whether the athleticism has kind of been sapped a little bit there. And that's, I think, the most prohibitive thing with Greenlaw for me is what is the cumulative effect of the injuries that we've seen to this point? Because this isn't a guy that's, coming off of these injuries, after his first or second season. This is a guy that's, 6-7 years in now. So I just don't know if he's going to be able to move the same, especially out in space.
Yep. You're pretty much going to have to roll the dice. And if you're lucky, that's great. And if you're not, not so much. But, speaking of rolling the dice and maybe potentially hedging your bets, this basketball season, when your favorite stars score buckets, we're alley-ooping you an opportunity to win money from watching sports with Underdog. Underdog is one of the leading sports apps, and you can play now in your state. To play, choose whether a player will go higher or lower on one of their stats, such as points, assists, rebounds, and more. They've got all your favorite leagues, teams, and stars to choose from. Create entries with all basketball picks or mix and match across other sports. You can play with as little as $1, and if you get everything right, you can win up to 1,000 times your money. So turn $1 into 1,000 just with your hoops knowledge. Download the Underdog app and sign up now using the promo code 3yards to unlock a special offer of up to $1,000 in bonus cash when you make your first deposit. Join in on the fun when you sign up with the promo code 3yards. Claim your special offer today and get up to $1,000 in bonus cash instantly upon first deposit. Higher or lower, you make the call on Underdog.
Be 18 plus, 21 plus in Massachusetts and Arizona, 19 plus in Colorado for some games, 19 plus in Alabama, New England, and present in a state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply. Void in Colorado. Concerned with your play, call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.ncpgambling.org. In Arizona, call 1-800-NEXT-STEP, 1-800-639-8783, or text NEXT-STEP to 53342. In New York, call the 24/7 Hope line at 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY to 467-369. Must be.
All right, and we are back from break. I feel like, Coach and Eric, there are a lot of injury-prone players in the NFL. It's just the sport, is just the nature of the game. Eric, you do have a fondness for one of the free agent linebackers that is hitting the market, or he may very well be re-signed as well.
Yeah, and that's going to be Arizona Cardinals inside linebacker, converted safety, Kaiser White. And just even that kind of versatility is something that I really like. You look at a guy in White here, and you see the play there. Obviously, Josh Allen scrambles for the first down, but this is a guy that can move with Josh Allen, that has the physicality to take him down. And I think being that converted safety has the coverage chops to really help where I think the defense has been leaky in the last few years, which it would be, covering the tight ends. I can't remember the last time the Dolphins were
Jordyn Brooks
not getting killed. True to an extent. Speaking of Arizona, I can't get Trey McBride out of my head. Still to this day. But I think Kaiser White, for my tastes, considering that Zack Baun would likely be, maybe a little bit too pricey, I think he would probably be my favorite option if you're looking external addition in free agency at the linebacker spot.
Yeah, I probably agree with that. A lot of my notes on Kaiser White mirror exactly what I have for Dre Greenlaw. I literally have in my notes, Dre Greenlaw light. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, Dre Greenlaw, when healthy, is a fantastic player. So if you want to take a player that, doesn't have the same injury concerns, but is almost as good of a player, Kaiser White is a great person to fill that role. I think that his background as a safety really shows up, where I wasn't as fond of Tyrell Dodson playing backwards. Kaiser White is a player that I am comfortable playing with backwards as well as going forward. I mean, he still runs those lanes. There's, a couple of examples in this Buffalo game where, like you said, Eric, he is able to wrap up Josh Allen and take him down. That's going to be a key thing the Dolphins linebackers are going to have to do for the Dolphins to take the next step. I agree that Baun is likely going to be well out of the price range. So, we look at the options that we're looking at today in terms of a player that is most likely to be healthy and within the price range, then Kaiser White might also be my favorite option out of these.
I do think that it's really dependent on the scheme fit, right? Jonathan Gannon comes from the Vic Fangio tree of defense, and he's been able to implement his version of that in Arizona successfully. Don't get me wrong. However, will that be able to translate into Miami? I kind of think of this as, Anthony Weaver got the type of players he needs in the linebacker group that have high IQ, are fast, are athletic, except for maybe Anthony Walker Jr. I think that was just like a linebacker 3, linebacker 4 special teams type of scenario. Don't get me wrong, but he had to go up there because of some injury issues that did pop up in the rest of the linebacker core. Kaiser White is 6'2", almost 6'3", 234 pounds. He's fast. He's rangy. He has all the athletic traits. Former safety turned linebacker. However, the ask is much more, and it is much greater. When I was reading some stuff about Arizona, about the Arizona Cardinals defense, taking a look at Kaiser White, a lot of their fans and analysts would not necessarily mind him leaving because of his performance on the field in 2024 and 2023. In 2023, he had a torn bicep, had a pretty great year, but he's more so known for as the locker room guy, the culture guy. And honestly, if you are looking to reestablish this locker room culture, having the dogs or maybe the quote unquote war daddies, Kaiser White is one of those guys. Now, if Jordyn Brooks is already one of them on the defense, you could potentially get another guy like Kaiser White, but it's dependent on the money. It's if Arizona is not willing to pay him $4 to $5 million annually, I think Miami kind of should. He's not linebacker 1 per se. He was linebacker 1 for the Cardinals, but he doesn't necessarily have to be linebacker 1 for the Miami Dolphins. He's able to, freely rush. He's a great looper. He's a great blitzer as well, and he can cover, as you said, on the back end. If you're in dime, you can. It's not necessarily going to be dime, but you can also have Kaiser White being your star player on defense. What I mean by the star is the star position, not the superstar of the defense, where you can leverage him around, kind of like what we expected out of Jalen Ramsey last season.
Yeah, and I think that's probably realistically, I think that's the thing that appeals to me most about a guy like Kaiser White. I've been saying for I don't even know how long now that I really wish the Dolphins had one of those hybrid safety linebacker type players on defense that can provide that versatility. And I think that Kaiser White would probably be the best chance that they're going to have at acquiring a player like that this offseason. Granted, as you mentioned, I think he was a little miscast in Arizona, kind of being the guy in the middle of their defense next to Zaven Collins, who is another guy that's kind of been in that same, man without a home kind of situation. But I think as a linebacker too, entrenched next to a guy like a Jordyn Brooks, you could see the best brought out of a player like Kaiser White in Miami.
Yeah, I agree with that in terms of being, linebacker too. If we look at, when Anthony Weaver came here, what everybody wanted to try to replicate was what they had in Baltimore with Roquan Smith and Patrick Queen. And that can be kind of a step in that same direction. Jordyn Brooks being your Roquan Smith in Miami, and then, your linebacker too, your Patrick Queen, somebody like Kaiser White would certainly fill that role well.
Yeah, and speaking of filling roles well, we have the guy that I think is going to be the apple of every team's eye in free agency this year. Coach Smith being up in the Philadelphia area, I'm sure you're very familiar with this player in Zack Baun. And the thing that really sticks out to me with Zack Baun is, yes, he's athletic. Yes, he's versatile. You see right here, he's actually taking a pass rushing snap. He does a really good job of holding the contain there on Jayden Daniels. But to me, it really feels like, and you guys can let me know if this is an apt comparison or not, because two different positions, albeit slightly, he kind of feels to me to the Eagles what Andrew Van Ginkel was last season to the Vikings, being that guy that's just always around the football. If there's a big play being made, somehow, some way, Zack Baun was involved in it.
Yeah.
He's just a magnet for the football.
Yeah, I thought you were going in a very different direction, but once you said Andrew Van Ginkel, I'm like, yeah. We do know that Vic Fangio pounded the table to get Andrew Van Ginkel back. Brian Flores got him back into Minnesota. The Dolphins didn't really make that big of an effort to have him come back in Miami, but dude, he had a breakout. Zack Baun had a breakout season as an off-ball linebacker for the Eagles. He was a finalist for DPOY, earned his first All-Pro selection and Pro Bowl nod. He is going to get paid this season. 150 tackles, 11 tackles for loss, 5 forced fumbles, 3.5 sacks, 4 PBUs, and 1 pick. He was a reliable blitzer, difference maker in coverage. He was a key part in the Eagles' turnaround for the defense. But, man, that money, it's going to be very, very important for the Dolphins to be cap compliant this season, and it's really how they manage their money well. I do hear some rumblings that the Eagles may try to franchise tag him for a year. That's a $27 million tag, though, for top 10 linebackers. I don't think that the Dolphins would even be willing to pay him that much money, let alone, $11, $12 million a year, considering that they need to shuffle the money around, get younger on defense. Not saying that Zack Baun is like an older player, but I think there's other avenues that they can go to. We talked about Tyrell Dodson being one of those linebackers, and then drafting someone in the draft. We'll talk about the drafting linebackers a little bit later on as the show goes.
Yeah, so I find that Andrew Van Ginkel comparison to be really interesting, especially considering the Vic Fangio connection there. Because if you remember back in 2023, that Van Ginkel began the season playing more off-ball linebacker than he had in previous years. So much in the same way that, him and Baun are both edge guys that they, tried to convert to off-ball linebackers. I think that, Van Ginkel found a more comfortable home on the edge still, where Baun was able to make that transition to off-ball linebacker better, but still able to contribute as an edge rusher. I mean, he plays really fast. You can move him around the defense. He shows great instincts for a player that, is being converted to an off-ball linebacker. You think about when we saw Van Ginkel do that, there was times that he looked in space like he just wasn't comfortable, and Baun just didn't look that way. If we're, really picking him apart compared to some of the other guys, I said Baun plays really fast, but he tends to try to go around blocks more often than some of the other guys, where other guys are running through it. But again, this is a guy who is converting to an off-ball linebacker, and that block deconstruction of being able to take on a block on the run is something that certainly can be developed. In the end, like we've all said, right, this is likely going to be a player that is well outside of Miami's price range, but I do think that this is a very good player. It's not just a flash in the pan. I think that he's going to continue to develop as an off-ball linebacker, and I can see him being a really good linebacker in the NFL for a long time.
So if it wasn't for money, I wonder if Anthony Weaver would use him the same way he was used in Philadelphia, just because the Dolphins, especially along the edge, have enough pass rushers when they're healthy, right? You have Chop Robinson, Jalen Phillips, maybe Bradley Chubb if he's not gone. You could look to potentially re-sign Cameron Good. He's a restricted free agent as well. And you got to wonder, they might go after maybe another edge rusher either in free agency or the draft. Where it's really interesting to me that I don't think Anthony Weaver would get someone just to play off-ball linebacker. Like, you're going to have to fit the run. You're going to have to scrape. You're going to have to fill. You're going to have to play those gaps and not just go around people. You need a thumper. You need someone who is going to stop the run if a guy like Zach Sealer is getting combo blocked, if Chop Robinson has his hands, his body in the ground, you need another guy that can get through those blocks, that can impact the line of scrimmage. And I don't think Baun would be that type of guy, especially up the middle and around the second level.
You're muted again, Eric.
Yeah, I think there's a case to be made that with a player like Baun, his strength would be in his versatility. And I think that there's an intriguing kind of situation where, maybe the Dolphins decide in their cap crunch that instead of addressing kind of off-ball linebacker or edge rusher, and really trying and, suffering the consequences at the other position and choosing between either two, where they kind of try to kill two birds with one stone with a guy like Baun, and kind of use him in that hybrid role that I think he's proven that he can play, although this year in Philadelphia played a lot more off-ball linebacker. But if you're looking for a guy that's going to be more of that traditional thumper in the middle, Kansas City's Nick Bolton is a very intriguing option as far as players kind of in that ilk. As a matter of fact, we see him right here once again against the Buffalo Bills. I tried to find clips of these guys against pretty good competition, just because I especially competition that the Dolphins are going to be playing, like Buffalo twice a year. And right over here, granted, this is an outside run, but you can see he does a really good job of getting in between the blocks there and kind of penetrating the backfield before Ray Davis is able to get to that outside. And it just shows, at least playing the run, some really impressive ability in the run fits. Let me take that off there.
Yeah, one of his strengths is his play recognition and pursuit. You can usually find Nick Bolton around the football. Granted, last season was not his best season. He had his ups and downs, but he's a message sending striker when he gets the runner squared up, and that is a mean, nasty combination with him and Jordyn Brooks. Like, all right, look, if you take a look at his frame, he's what, 5'11", 230. He's not your typical NFL linebacker starter. Like, that's not the standard from a size standpoint. But his rugged frame, how thick he is, how hard he hits, it makes up for it. Like, when you think about strong, forceful inside linebackers, that's what Nick Bolton is. He was an SEC standout, 2-time Super Bowl champion, has over 100 tackles in 3 out of the 4 seasons in the NFL. Only 9 games he missed in his entire career with a wrist injury. With that first Super Bowl run, 180 tackles. 180 tackles, okay? He bounced back from his 2023 injury with 106 tackles, 1 pick, 1 forced fumble, 2 fumble recoveries, and 11 tackles for a loss. I do think he would be a schematic fit. The frame makes me question a little bit, but if the Dolphins are able to get the defensive line squared away, which we expect him to, him and Brooks would be very, very scary to play up against for opposing offenses. But if they are going to do that, they have to be willing to be able to pay almost $11 to $12 million a year to Nick Bolton, because I'm sure he's going to have other suitors in free agency.
Yeah, so I would agree with most of what was said. He is reads plays well, flows to the ball. He's a, downhill missile, when he sees that lane running through it. I think that compared to some of the other players on the list, he doesn't have some of the same versatility. We talked about Kaiser White being, possibly a star type player. We talked about Zack Baun possibly moving up and being able to play on the edge. Like Bolton is strictly a linebacker. So I think that compared to some of the other guys, he's limiting in that aspects. One of the things I was a little disappointed with watching Bolton was, I didn't feel like he did a great job taking on blocks. Even going back to a Tyrell Dodson, that's more of a, downhill scrape linebacker that will run through blocks. I felt like Bolton was more of the, Dodson was more of the fill linebacker. Bolton feels more like the scrape linebacker that, uses those instincts to kind of scrape over the top, find the hole, and go. So I think from a schematic fit, it's going to come down to what Weaver is looking for in the linebackers, because I think there is a lot of similarities between what Bolton and Brooks would bring. So if you're looking for two linebackers, you better put a really good defensive line in front of those two, that the defensive line is eating up those blocks and those guys are able to run. But if you're looking for more complementary linebackers, in the sense of that you're going to have one guy who, runs down a hill, will meet a block in the hole, and allows Jordyn Brooks to scrape in and make the play. I don't think Bolton is your fit there, but, so I think that from a scheme fit, it's going to come down to what Weaver wants from those two linebackers.
Yeah, I do think it's going to be
it's funny. No, go ahead.
Yeah, I do think it's really going to be dependent on what Anthony Weaver likes. He values that versatility. You can play off ball, you can play inside, you can cover. It might put Nick Bolton in Miami. It might just put, if what you're asking out of Nick Bolton is the same as Jordyn Brooks, you're trying to fit a square peg into a circle. You're going to get what you expect out of him, but you can't ask him to do more. And that's what Steve Spagnuolo's defense was about. You get the right players to do exactly what you want them to do, and they'll succeed. Outside of some of these Kansas City defenders, not a lot of them have been successful outside in Kansas City. So it does make me a little bit weary that if the Dolphins are to pursue him, and if they would pay him $11 to $12 million a year, I think there would be a big disappointment, especially if he's not able to fill up the stat sheet the same way he did in Kansas City.
So this might be, probably the hottest take I think I've had on a player since we've started doing this. But I mean, I can't see myself paying $11 or $12 million for a Landon Roberts that guesses right a little bit more often. I mean, maybe that's an exaggeration. It is an exaggeration.
I think that's a bit too much.
It's a bit much. It is.
I will say, right. Landon Roberts is a former Super Bowl winner, so I can see where you're getting it there.
Listen. Landon Roberts, when he's got the right hole and he recognizes the play on a in short yardage situations, he's hitting the guy and the guy's not going.
Yeah, but you can't ask him to run that wheel route, and he's gonna get beat over the top. You can't just do that.
And you can't ask Nick Bolton to do that either.
Exactly.
And that's kind of my point there, is that he's I think he's a guy that might end up being locked into just kind of being that 2-down linebacker that you really would prefer you don't have to play in space.
Unless maybe you move again, we're getting a little bit too, we're thinking that he's already on the Dolphins, unless you get Jordyn Brooks to be that versatile chess piece on the second level of the defense, and you have Jalen Ramsey doing something else where you're able to move the defense around even pre-snap to confuse the quarterback on what looks are coming. Maybe you move Brooks to an off-ball location, have him blitz right behind Chop, have him loop around, and gain pressure and have Nick Bolton just, man that second level, especially if it's 5 or more people coming on the blitz. But Coach, what are your thoughts on something like that?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the Landon Roberts take is coming in a little too hot for me. I get where you're going with it, Eric, but I do think that Nick Bolton has a little more range running sideline to sideline, being able to make plays off the edge when we talk about a outside zone run and being able to cut that off. I think that Nick Bolton has a little more capability there than what Landon Roberts does. I agree with the limitations in coverage. This isn't a player that you can flex outside the box and be able to cover somebody. I don't like the idea of taking Jordyn Brooks and reinventing his role in order to fit Nick Bolton in there. We found a role that Brooks plays really well, and I'd like to continue to see him be that in the middle of the defense, be the leader on the defense, continue to develop in the role that he excelled at in 2024. And my personal preference would be to bring in somebody else that complements him, more than makes him move into a different role.
Yeah, I think my probably top target for a linebacker would to bring back Tyrell Dodson, because he could complement Jordyn Brooks, and he was more than serviceable compared to previous Dolphins linebackers.
Right, and that's the other thing here is that's going to be factored in is a linebacker is a position. Granted, all positions on the football field are somewhat reliant on the guys around them, but it feels especially so at linebacker. The Dolphins linebacker core can improve just as a byproduct of the team addressing the defensive line even further, which I think is something that, we kind of lose in the midst of evaluating these positions individually. So I wouldn't be against bringing Dodson back, especially as that budget option, because I think that he is more than serviceable in that role. I just think if you have the opportunity to make the upgrade and it makes sense financially, I don't see why you wouldn't.
Yep.
Yeah, and I like bringing back Dodson would probably be one of my top moves that I would try to make at linebacker. I wouldn't make that move and stand pat there. And that's a great point about the defensive line being able to enhance the linebackers. We talk about the pass rush that we're hoping to get back with having Chop Robinson, having Jalen Phillips return healthy, maybe having Bradley Chubb return healthy as well. And my primary concern with Dodson as an every down linebacker would be his ability to hold up in extended coverage. But if you're, getting maybe not the best, right, but a good version of Phillips and Chubb back, that's going to be a lot better than what we had last year. And he wouldn't, likely be asked very often to, cover for extended periods of time. So yeah, I think that, Dodson, we know that he can play in the system. We know that he complements Brooks well. He would be one of my first targets. But I wouldn't do that and then say, no, I'm not going to look at a Kaiser White, or I'm not going to look at a day 2 linebacker in the draft. I think there is still room to improve the unit beyond that.
Yeah, if you can get home with 4, at least 30 to 40% of your overall snaps in the season, you're looking really, really good, and it helps the second and third level defenders out. We saw that with the Eagles and some of the other playoff teams as well, but specifically the Philadelphia Eagles. It's going to be really interesting to see how they fill out this defensive unit, either through this free agency or maybe even through the draft. Like, the defense has to get younger, they have to get cheaper, and they have to get faster as well. So I'm more so opposed to getting young guys in free agency on cheap contracts that, can play, albeit not the best of the best, but can grow within the system, can continue to develop and have that continuity, because continuity is important in this defense, and continuity is what allows, the defense to improve, be consistent, and get better. As always, folks, thank you so much for staying with us here on Scouting the Fins. part of the 3 Yards Per Carry podcast here on the 5 Reasons Sports Network. As always, go Fins.